The rain was relentless, hammering the windshield of Jaxon's beat-up Chevy like it wanted to drown us both. Seattle's streets were slick, the kind of wet that made every light blur into a streak of red and gold, like the city was bleeding out. I sat in the passenger seat, tracing the cool silver locket my grandmother gave me before she passed, its delicate chain a tether to something solid in a world that felt like it was slipping away. Jaxon was rambling about some tech startup internship, his voice loud over the radio's static hum, oblivious to the way my fingers gripped the locket tighter with every word. He was always the golden boy, Mom and Dad's pride, the one with a future. Me? I was just Kaylin, the shadow they barely noticed, the one who cleaned up his messes and smiled through their neglect. My medical ethics essay was due in 2 days, but my mind was stuck on the locket's inscription. Keep breathing, little flame. I didn't know how much I'd need those words tonight. The truck came out of nowhere, a flash of red light, tires screaming, and then the world exploded. Metal crunched, glass shattered, and the sharp tang of gasoline cut through the rain-soaked air. My body slammed against the seatbelt, pain blooming in my side like a firework. Jaxon's shout was the last thing I heard before everything went black, the locket slipping from my fingers as the world stopped. When I woke, the sterile hum of fluorescent lights buzzed above me, flickering in time with the beeping monitor by my head. My body felt like it was made of lead, every breath a knife twisting in my side. I tried to move, but the IV tugged at my skin, and my voice came out as a broken croak, raw and useless. The hospital room was cold, the kind of cold that sank into your bones and stayed there. I stared at the cracked ceiling tile, trying to piece together how I got here, where Jaxon was, what had happened. My locket was gone, probably lost in the wreck, and the absence on my chest felt like a betrayal. The door creaked open, and I smelled them before I saw them. Mom's cloying jasmine perfume, Dad's crisp aftershave. Elise and Marcus, my parents, walked in, their footsteps slow, deliberate, like they were stepping into a boardroom, not their daughter's hospital room. No tears, no rush to my side, no "Kaylin, you're okay." Just Mom's sharp voice cutting through the haze. She's awake. She didn't look at me, didn't touch my hand, just spoke to the doctor like I was a piece of furniture. Dad stood behind her, arms crossed, staring at the wall above my head, his face blank, bored. I tried to lift my hand, to reach for them, but it fell back, heavy and useless. The doctor murmured something about surgery, a lost kidney, stable condition. My brain lagged, but my heart caught every word. They'd taken something from me, and no one cared how I felt about it. Then Mom's voice sliced through the fog, cold and clear. She's just a burden anyway. The words weren't loud, but they hit like a sledgehammer, sinking into me deeper than any scalpel. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the monitor's beat too steady, too loud. I couldn't cry, couldn't scream, not with my body stitched together and my throat dry as sand, but inside something hardened, a quiet promise stronger than the pain. If I survived this, I'll never be their burden again. The days blurred into a gray haze, the rain outside Seattle General a constant drum against the windows. I counted ceiling tiles to keep from drowning in the pain that flared every time I breathed too deep. My ribs felt like they were made of glass, sharp and brittle. Nurses came and went, their hands quick and efficient, but their eyes slid over me like I was already fading. Mom and Dad barely visited, and when they did, it was all about Jaxon, his recovery, his future, his needs. I was the afterthought, the collateral damage from a crash they blamed on me, though Jaxon was driving. Late one night, the hospital quieted, the hallway lights casting long shadows across my bed. I was drifting, not asleep but not fully awake, when their voices slipped through the cracked door. Mom's heels clicked on the tile, her whisper sharp and urgent. "So, you're saying if we take her other kidney?" The doctor's voice was low, tired. She wouldn't survive that. Dad's response was calm, like he was ordering coffee. Jaxon needs it, he has a future. Mom's words came next, heavy as the antiseptic air. She's just a burden anyway. This would be her contribution. My breath caught, tears soaking into the pillow as I forced myself to stay still, to keep them from knowing I was awake. They were planning to let me die for Jaxon, the son they'd always chosen, the one whose life was worth more than mine. The betrayal wasn't new. I'd always known they loved him more. But this was different. This was them standing outside my door, plotting to carve me up like I was nothing more than spare parts. I swallowed the scream clawing at my throat, letting the silence hide me. That night, I learned what it meant to be truly alone. The next morning, the rain hadn't stopped, painting Seattle in shades of gray. Mom came in, her cream blouse pristine, her sunglasses pushed up on her head. I saw it then, the diamond necklace glinting at her throat, new and expensive, the kind she'd once said was irresponsible to buy. My stomach twisted. I knew where it came from. The insurance payout from the crash, my pain. She caught me staring, her lips tightening, but she didn't hide it. She just checked her phone, muttered something about Jaxon's doctor, and left, her perfume lingering like a bruise. I pulled the thin blanket up to my chin, staring at the wall, whispering to myself. They never planned to save me. The hospital felt colder after that, the air biting at my skin. I was counting breaths, each one a reminder I was still here, when the fire alarm screamed through the ward. The lights flickered and the smell of smoke seeped under the door. Panic clawed at me as I dragged myself upright, pain shooting through my side. The IV line tangled, but I yanked it free, blood trickling down my arm. The hallway was chaos, nurses shouting, patients stumbling, smoke curling like a living thing. I crawled toward the stairwell, my lungs burning, my stitches pulling with every move. A nurse grabbed my arm, pulling me through the haze to safety, but the fear stayed, a reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything again. Back in my room, the fire contained, but the air still acrid. I lay shaking, the monitor's beat grounding me. Nurse Abigail, older with kind eyes, sat beside me, her hand warm on mine. "You're not invisible, Kaylin," she said, her voice steady. "Don't let them take that from you." Her words sank into me, a lifeline in the dark, but the danger wasn't over. That night, a power outage plunged the hospital into darkness, the monitors silent, the hum of machines gone. I lay frozen, listening to footsteps in the hall, wondering if they were coming for me. The backup generator kicked in, but the fear lingered, a shadow that followed me. The next day, I overheard nurses whispering outside my door. The payoff from her accident came through. They redirected it for family needs. The words cut deeper than the crash, confirming what I'd suspected. They'd taken the money meant for my recovery, my therapy, my future, and spent it on Jaxon, on that necklace, on their comfort. I was nothing to them but a means to an end. Another night, another threat. A medication error sent my body into shock, my throat closing, my heart racing as alarms blared. Nurses rushed in, their hands a blur as they stabilized me, but the near miss left me trembling. Was it an accident, or had someone wanted me gone? The question gnawed at me, feeding the promise I'd made. They will never have another piece of me. By the time Dad walked in with discharge papers, his aftershave sharp in the sterile air, I knew I couldn't go home. He didn't look at me, just signed the forms and said, "Doctor says you're out tomorrow. We'll need to help Jaxon transition when he gets home." He left without waiting for a reply, the papers a cold weight on the tray. They were planning my release for Jaxon's benefit, another sacrifice I was expected to make. I waited until the next nurse, A young woman with tired eyes came to check my IV. My voice was barely a whisper. "Can I talk to the social worker? I don't feel safe." Her eyes met mine, a flicker of understanding passing between us. She nodded and left, the door closing softly. An hour later, Nora, the social worker, arrived, her dark curls pulled back, her eyes calm but sharp. I told her everything. How I'd heard them plan to take my kidney, how they'd taken my money, how I was just a thing to use. She listened, her pen still, and said, "I believe you, Kaylin. We'll protect you." That evening, Mum's heels clicked in the hall, her voice sharp as she argued with security. "She's my daughter. She's lying about us." The guard stood firm, blocking her path. I watched from my bed, the glass door between us, her hands slamming against it, her face twisted with rage. Dad stood behind her, his glare cold like he could will me into submission. But I wasn't theirs anymore. The nurses and Nora stood by me, their presence a shield. I didn't need to shout back. I just watched as security led Mom away, her screams fading into the hospital's hum. As the rain tapped against the window, I closed my eyes, the monitor's beep a steady reminder of my survival. "This is the first day of my freedom," I whispered, the words a vow to the city lights flickering beyond the glass. They thought they could erase me, but I was still here, and I would fight on my terms. The hospital doors slid shut behind me with a hiss, sealing away the echoes of my mother's screams and my father's cold stare. Seattle's rain-soaked air hit my face, sharp and alive, as I clutched the plastic bag holding my discharge papers and my grandmother's silver locket. Nurse Abigail's parting words echoed in my head. "Don't forget who you are." Her soft hug and the gentle squeeze of my shoulders lingered like a promise. But the weight of my reality pressed hard. I was Kaylin, 23, with no money, no family, and a body still stitched together from a crash that nearly killed me. The scar on my side burned with every step toward the bus stop, my thrift store cardigan doing little against the Pacific Northwest chill. I was free. But freedom felt like a cliff's edge, thrilling, terrifying, and entirely mine to navigate. The bus ride across town was a blur of wet windows and the low hum of strangers' conversations. Every jolt reminded me how fragile I was, my legs trembling as I stepped off into a neighborhood that smelled of bleach and asphalt. The transitional housing unit was a squat, gray building, its windows smudged with years of neglect. A staff member handed me a thin blanket and pointed to a room at the end of a dim hallway. The mattress was hard, the sheets rough, and a flickering lamp buzzed like a dying insect. I closed the door, leaning against it, my breath shallow as I took in the peeling paint and the single window overlooking a cracked parking lot. Cars moved in and out, their headlights cutting through the drizzle. I set the locket on the windowsill, its silver catching the faint streetlight, and sat on the bed's edge. They left me with nothing, I thought. No home, no trust, just a scar and a promise to survive. That first night, I caught my reflection in the cracked mirror above the dresser. My face was pale, hollowed out by weeks of pain and betrayal, the scar on my collarbone a jagged reminder of how close they'd come to ending me. I touched it, tracing the line, then met my own eyes. "If they left me for dead, I'll live anyway," I whispered, the words thin but fierce, bouncing back from the glass. The defiance felt like a spark, small but enough to keep me moving. The next morning I woke before dawn, the room cold, the air heavy. My body protested as I pulled on my shoes, each movement a negotiation with pain. I needed work, any work, to prove I could stand on my own. By noon, I stood outside a 24-hour bookstore on Pike Street, its neon sign flickering like a heartbeat. The manager, a tired man with a coffee stain on his shirt, sized me up and handed me a mop. "Night shift starts at 8, cash on Fridays," he said, no questions asked. I nodded, grateful for his indifference. That night I cleaned floors, wiped shelves, and hauled trash, each step a reminder of my body's limits. The smell of old paper and ink clung to my clothes, a strange comfort that reminded me of library afternoons spent hiding from home, finding safety in stories. During breaks, I used the store's ancient computer to enroll in online GED courses, my fingers trembling from exhaustion but refusing to stop. Each dollar I earned went into a jar under my bed, a quiet rebellion against the family that had taken everything. But survival wasn't just about money, it was about staying alive in a world that kept testing me. One night, walking home from the bookstore, the streets dark and slick, a shadow moved behind me. Footsteps echoed, too close, too deliberate. My heart pounded as I quickened my pace, the scar on my side tugging with every step. A hand grabbed my shoulder, and I spun, adrenaline drowning the pain. The mugger's face was half hidden under a hood, his breath sour as he demanded my bag. I swung the mop handle I still carried, catching his arm. He cursed, stumbling back, and I ran, my lungs burning, until I reached the housing unit's door. I locked it behind me, shaking, the locket pressed against my chest. "They can't take me," I whispered, the words a mantra against the fear. Weeks later, my closet's cheap rod collapsed, spilling my few clothes onto the floor. As I gathered them, an envelope slipped from a stack of papers, my name written in Nora's careful script. My breath caught as I opened it, finding a USB drive labeled Seattle General Audio and a note that smelled faintly of lavender. "When you're ready to protect yourself, this is yours to use. Nora." I waited until the library opened, its quiet hum a stark contrast to the chaos in my chest. I plugged the USB into a borrowed laptop, my hands trembling as the file loaded. My mother's voice filled the headphones. "So, you're saying if we take her other kidney?" The doctor's response was muffled but clear. "She wouldn't survive that." Then Dad, "Jaxon has a future. She doesn't." And Mom again, her tone slicing through me. "She's just a burden anyway." Tears slid down my cheeks, silent as the truth I'd always felt was laid bare. They hadn't just neglected me. They'd planned to let me die. I closed the laptop, the library's stillness pressing against me. Nora's note lay in my lap, her words a challenge. "When you're ready." I wasn't sure I was. But the USB in my pocket felt like a weapon, a piece of truth I could wield when the time came. That night, walking home under Seattle's streetlights, I held it tightly, whispering to the dark. They tried to silence me. I'll be the one to speak. The stars were hidden behind clouds, but the promise felt brighter than any light. Months passed, each day a stitch in the fabric of a new life. I worked nights at the bookstore, studied mornings at the library, and slept in the afternoons, my world a cycle of effort and exhaustion. The scar on my side ached when I pushed too hard, a reminder of what I'd survived. I avoided calls from blocked numbers, suspecting they were my parents, letting them ring out into silence, but danger followed me, as if the world wasn't done testing my resolve. One evening, crossing a busy downtown street, a car swerved too close, its headlights blinding me. I stumbled back, my heart racing as tires screeched, missing me by inches. The driver sped off, leaving me shaking on the sidewalk. Was it an accident, or had they found me? The question lingered, feeding my vigilance. By September, 5 months after leaving the hospital, I'd carved out a fragile routine. My shared apartment smelled of burnt coffee and floor cleaner, the thin carpet muffling my steps. I was locking up the bookstore one night, the air heavy with the promise of rain, when I noticed a figure lingering across the street. Their silhouette was too familiar. Dad's broad shoulders, his deliberate stance, my pulse spiked, but I kept my movements steady, slipping the key into the lock and walking away, refusing to look back. The next morning, a note was slipped under my door, unsigned but in Mom's handwriting. "We need to talk." I burned it in the sink, the flames curling the paper into ash. They wouldn't pull me back into their world. The tension escalated when I returned to the housing unit one evening to find my room ransacked. Clothes were strewn across the floor, the jar of cash gone. My heart sank, but the locket and USB hidden in a sock were untouched. I reported it to the staff, who shrugged it off as a random break-in, but I knew better. They were sending a message, trying to break me again. I replaced the jar with a locked box, my resolve hardening. They won't take this from me. 3 years later, I was no longer Kaylin, the girl they'd discarded. I was Claire Arden, co-owner and COO of a Seattle healthcare startup, built to protect the vulnerable, people like me, betrayed by those they trusted. My office overlooked Puget Sound, the water a steady reminder of the life I'd fought for. I kept my grandmother's locket in my desk drawer next to the USB that had changed everything. Sometimes late at night I'd hold it, the weight grounding me, reminding me why I kept going. One morning, an HR email pinged on my screen. "New executive candidate, Jaxon Arden." My brother, the golden child, had applied for a job at my company, unaware I was here. My fingers paused on the keyboard, a small smile tugging at my lips. "You found me." His resume was a mess. Short stints, failed projects, a desperate plea for a chance. I scheduled his interview for 8 a.m., clearing my desk of anything he didn't need to see. The rain fell in steady lines against my office windows as I prepared. The USB beside my notebook, a silent promise of truth. Jaxon walked in the next morning, older, heavier, his eyes restless like they'd always been. He didn't recognize me at first, his gaze sliding over my gray blazer like I was just another suit. Then I looked up, meeting his eyes, and his face drained of color. You're alive," he stammered, his voice breaking. I nodded, letting the silence stretch until he squirmed. Sliding the USB across the table, I said, "Yes, Jaxon, and I remember everything you let them do." His hands hovered, trembling, before dropping to his lap. "Claire, I didn't know they'd—" I cut him off, my voice cold but steady. "I don't need excuses. This company protects people betrayed by those they trusted. You're exactly what we fight against." He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment I saw the boy he'd been, the brother I'd once loved before he became their weapon. But pity couldn't reach me now. "You'll never work here," I said, standing, "or anywhere I can reach. And trust me, I can reach far." He left, the glass door closing softly, and I stood in the morning light, breathing deeply, feeling whole. Weeks later, a plain envelope arrived in my apartment's mailbox. No return address, but Mom's unmistakable handwriting. I stood under the fluorescent lobby lights, weighing whether to open it. Curiosity won, and her words spilled out, desperate and slanted. "We're losing the house. Jaxon can't find work. You're still our daughter." The audacity burned. They remembered me now, not as a daughter, but as a lifeline. I wrote back, my pen steady. "I was your daughter when I was dying in a hospital bed. You chose Jaxon. Live with it." I mailed it without a return address, the metal flap of the mailbox closing with finality. That same week, another threat came. During a company meeting, the elevator I was in lurched, then stopped, the lights flickering out. The air grew thick, my breath shallow as I pounded on the doors. Minutes dragged, panic rising until maintenance pried me free. I emerged, shaken but unharmed, suspecting sabotage. My family's reach felt closer than ever, but I refused to cower. One morning, I opened an email from Seattle General. They'd launched the Claire Arden Protocol, a campaign to protect minors and vulnerable patients from coercion in organ donation. My new name, bolded in the text, was a quiet triumph. It was my legacy, built from the ashes of betrayal, a shield for others. I closed my laptop, the weight of it settling like a warm blanket. I walked to Puget Sound before dawn, the dock empty, the water whispering against the pilings. The locket was warm against my wrist, my grandmother's voice echoing. "Little flame." I spoke softly, the words mixing with the salt air. I kept living when they tried to end me. The wounds they'd left, Mom's dismissal, Dad's indifference, Jackson's complicity, would always scar, but they no longer controlled me. I let go of the anger, not for them, but for me. It had fueled my survival, but I wanted more. A life built on dignity, not defiance. Sitting on the dock, my shoes tapping the weathered wood, I thought of the faces that had tried to break me. I let them pass like clouds, choosing myself instead. The sun rose, warming my face, and I stood, the locket a steady weight, my steps firm as I walked back to the city. Seattle woke around me, coffee shops brewing, bookstores opening, clinics humming with the work I'd helped build. They thought it was the end of my story, I thought, stepping into my apartment, the bay glistening outside. It was only the beginning.